Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live stream. My name is Yvette Morataya. I'm the Outreach Director for Informed Immigrant. I've been with the platform now for about 2 years. I'm really excited about the conversation that we'll be having today. We'll be talking about mental health in the immigrant community. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that today's conversation is meant to be more of a general conversation. While we may have a few minutes at the very end to answer a few questions, unfortunately, we won't be responding to any personal questions. This is not meant to replace seeking out professional help. If you feel like you need to speak to someone, please reach out to a mental health practitioner therapist. We also have some free resources on informedimmigrant.com. There's a great guide that was created by Dr. Germán Cadena that directly addresses the stressors that the immigrant community faces. We'll be posting that in the chat box. And if you're looking for the Spanish version of this conversation, we'll be starting promptly at 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern. So stay tuned if you want to watch that part. Si están buscando la versión donde estamos hablando en español sobre la salud mental para la comunidad inmigrante, vamos a empezar a las 11:30 Pacífico, 2:30 Este. Bueno, nuevamente, Cheryl, muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Bilingual brain. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, it happens. But Cheryl, thank you so much for being with us today. I just want to make sure that we're excited to have this conversation. I'm glad that you're joining us. I've had the pleasure of working with Cheryl on various projects. I'm really excited that you all get to know her a little bit. Cheryl, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do at Hope Center for Wellness?
Yeah, thank you so much, Yvette. I'm super excited to be here with you, and I always appreciate an invitation to come and talk about mental health. So I am based here in Washington, D.C., and one of the things that I appreciate about technology is being able to connect with everyone through Facebook Live or any other way. I am a founding director and one of the therapists at the Hope Center for Wellness. And we're a wellness practice focused on holistic healing. And we're going to talk a little bit about what holistic healing means in our lives. I have been in DC for more than a decade, I think probably close to 15 years. I grew up in New Jersey, and I am originally from Honduras.
Thank you, Cheryl. As I mentioned, it's always been a pleasure working with you. So I'm really excited that people will get to hear a little bit about you and also understand that, you also, not only are you an expert in this field, but you understand what it's like to be an immigrant in this country and like some of the stressors that come with it. But, there's a lot that is stressing out folks in general, but particularly the immigrant community. I mean, there's just so much happening. We're in the middle of a global pandemic where we're seeing that the immigrant community, who takes up a big part of essential workers, are being impacted not only with the stress of getting sick or where their next meal is going to come from, et cetera, but the government is leaving them out of any type of protection. So there's just a lot of stress coming with that, but then also taking into consideration everything that comes with the elections and politics. I mean, we're seeing policies that are changing at a rapid rate and are negatively impacting the immigrant community. There's the fear of family separation and deportations, as we're seeing a ramp up in that as well. And we can't even get started with the Black immigrant community, who's also facing all of the stress that comes with racism and discrimination. So there's just so much to unpack. And I know that we're not going to address all of this in this session, but I think that as we go into this conversation, it's extremely important to keep all of that in mind. Let's get started. What does mental health look like for the immigrant community, taking into consideration all of the unique stressors that I've just mentioned?
Yeah, everything you mentioned, Yvette, politics, election, family separations, pandemic, racism, xenophobia, the hateful political rhetoric impacts our mental health. We call that environmental stressors, or stressors that are around us that impact our well-being. And as you were saying all of that, I'm a very visual person, and I was actually creating an image of a person being impacted by everything that you're saying. That's a lot of stress for someone. That, of course, all of what we're experiencing right now, a pandemic, which is considered a crisis, hateful rhetoric, anti-immigrant legislation, lack of policies for our immigrant community, can impact our entire system. And when I say that, I mean our brain, the way that our brain thinks and functions, our nervous system, and our ability to regulate our emotions. So that's a lot on someone's psyche. And we're going to talk tools, because it's not just about the not so great news. There's also a lot of tools and things that we can do. But if you or someone that you know is feeling stressed out, anxious, or depressed, or has PTSD or trauma that is being reactivated or relived because of the environment that we're in right now, that's a normal response to something chaotic that is happening in our environment. So a lot of times we may ask questions like, why do I feel this way? I shouldn't be feeling this way. I'm strong. But if we have an environment like the one we have described that is connected directly to our lives, the lives of the people that we care about, and our well-being, our system will respond in such a way that impacts how we feel, impacts how we think, and impacts our actions and behaviors.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, it everything that's currently stressing the immigrant community, there's just so much to keep in mind, and the way that we behave and the way that we think, all of it influences us. So, as we consider about like what's impacting the immigrant community, what are some signs that people should look out for when they should be seeking help?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main things that we want to see is changes in the way that we do things and the way that we operate. So changes in our habits. We either sleep more or less than we normally do. Changes in our eating. We eat more and less. Changes in our mood. Our moods are changing. We're unable to regulate our emotions. We're getting into fights with people, either our partners, our colleagues, our friends. We are not our baseline, or emotional baseline, or how we normally operate when things are going well. We may experience lack of concentration, lack of focus. We're unable to kind of get things done. We're unable to manage worries, and our worries feel excessive, like we're unable to kind of control them. And sometimes we may ruminate or think about things that happened over and over and over again. Many people may experience perhaps reliving something that they have experienced in the past. So if they experienced something traumatic in the past, they may re-experience it in terms of nightmares, or in terms of flashbacks or memories. And one of the things that happens too, we may want to disconnect, or we want to isolate ourselves from other people. We may also experience feelings or sensations of hopelessness, like no matter what, things are not going to get any better. And if all of this or some of the symptoms that I mentioned happens 2 consecutive weeks without any changes, without your ability to kind of manage things, that's an alert that we should talk to someone who can help us.
Yeah, so you mentioned that one of the things that people should really look out for is the change of emotions, or feeling like really hopeless, or going on this like roller coaster of one day maybe they feel like a lot of hope, and then the next day they're feeling like really down in the dumps. They're feeling like really hopeless, and like it's a lot to go on a roller coaster of emotions. It's exhausting. So like what could you say to people who are experiencing that right now?
Yes, absolutely. First, all of our emotions are valid. Sometimes we look at emotions as good and bad. Our emotions are a natural response to something that we're experiencing. And sometimes it could feel like a roller coaster. We may feel joy at this moment. I feel joyful that I'm with you. After the call, I may feel stressed if I have a lot on my plate. So we can experience a fluctuation of emotions. So one thing I like to say about emotions is that our emotions are meant to pass through. Like the word motion in them, they're meant to pass through. So they're not permanent. We can experience multiple emotions in one day, and we can even hold multiple emotions at the same time. I can be joyful and I can be nervous for being here. So I can hold two emotions at the same time. And that's one of the invitations I invite people to do. How do we hold both? How do we acknowledge that both of them are important? We want to be able to lean into that intense emotions, because what happens normally is that we reject. We reject fear, we reject sadness, we reject anger. We want to be able to experience the other ones that makes us feel better or good. But we don't want to reject the other ones, the other emotions that may not feel too great in our system, because they're all part of our experience. So what we want to do is we want to lean into them. And eventually and that allows us to be able to manage them in a different way, or that we have a different relationship with them. We don't want to be afraid of fear. We don't want to be afraid of anger. We want to welcome them and name them, because the more that we do that, the more likely they're going to lessen.
Yeah, I mean, I understand completely when you're saying about trying to acknowledge the emotions that we're feeling, because I know I experience that a lot when, one day you're like, especially working in the immigration field, like one day you could be really excited about a win, but then you see all of these other cases of things happening, and I'm not even directly impacted. So I think it's extremely important that people are able to understand that it's okay to feel happy about one thing while also acknowledging that there's this other stuff that's happening that's really stressing you out. But I want to make sure that we also talk about suicide prevention. We are currently like the month of September, for those that don't know, is Suicide Prevention Month. Today would be the last day, but I want to make sure that we do cover it. What can you say to people who are having suicidal thoughts, and like where or how they can reach out for help?
Yes. The first thing is that there is help. That's the main message I want to send to people. A lot of us can experience feelings of hopelessness, feeling a lot of pain and despair, like things are not going to get any better. And some people have experienced thoughts like, it may be better if I'm not around. The difference between a thought and suicidal action or planning is when we start to plan, when we start to kind of imagine, this is what I would do to hurt myself. But even when we start just thinking, I don't want to be around, this is too much for me, those are signs that we need to be looking out for help, that we need to be talking to people that we trust, who can listen to us non-judgmentally and who can help guide us or perhaps provide the support that we need. And it's an opportunity to find someone who can support you in like the counseling world or the therapy world. We want to be mindful if we're on the other end, and I think I'm probably jumping ahead, if we're on the other end of someone who reaches out to us for help, we want to be mindful about what we say, and we want to listen attentively without necessarily giving our input, but asking questions like, how can I help? I'm here for you. Thank you for your courage to share. Thank you for telling me and trusting me with this information. But for someone who may be experiencing intense pain, where they may feel like it's not worth being here, one thing I have to say is that when we talked about emotions a little bit, is that we talked in the lens of emotions can pass. So whatever pain people may be experiencing can be dealt with by processing it with someone else, by gaining the coping skills to be able to deal with that intensity. And one thing I like to say about suicide is that suicide is a permanent act to something, a feeling, a thought, or a problem that could be temporary.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. So we can share in the chat. There's two ways to get help. There's a bilingual hotline for suicide prevention, in a crisis text line for the people can text if they prefer to text versus calling someone.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I know a lot of times it's really hard to reach out for help, because some people might be feeling like when they do reach out, like, what if I'm adding an additional stressor onto somebody? Like, how do I, how do people, because I know I come from an immigrant family, it's hard to ask for help. So, how would you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really hard to ask for help. And I think in our communities, in our culture, we do the opposite. We help more than ask for help, right? Like we should do and be there for others. And sometimes we leave ourselves last. Know that many other people have had, if we're talking about the thoughts that we describe, suicidal thoughts, have been on the same spot. And there's no reason to have pain in isolation. There's no reason to hurt alone. Sometimes we may want to identify who are the people that we may want to talk to based on my relationship with that person, based on how they have responded to my problems or other people's problems in the past. And if you are concerned about, I don't want to bring my problems onto others, what I normally tell people is our responsibility to seek help, and it's the responsibility of someone else to set boundaries if they're not able to provide the help that we need. But helping other people doesn't mean that we have to do the work. It could be that I may not have the resources that you need, but I'm going to get someone else. I'm going to direct you to Informed Immigrant and all the resources they have. I'm going to direct you to a therapist. So when we think about asking for help, think about all the things that you do for other people as well. And a lot of times the person on the other end, that person offering the help, feels a sense of honor to be able to provide some sort of support to the person who's asking.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, a lot of the things that it's difficult for the immigrant community, and how we've been kind of conditioned. Because I'm not an immigrant myself. My parents came from Guatemala, but I know that I understand completely about it's not normal for like my mom to call me and be like, I need help with this, or I'm feeling this way. Like that's just not a conversation that really happens amongst my family, and I know that I wasn't conditioned that way either. And it's easier for me to reach out to someone and be like, how can I help you, than I'm really struggling right now, how can you support me with this? Like that's still something that I have to unlearn, and then learn that it's okay to ask for help. So I think it's extremely important to point that out, because I identify it with it completely. But sorry.
Absolutely. And just to add to what you're saying, that's a very common experience. What I love the part that you said about unlearning. I think one thing that we can all do as a community and as a young adults or adults is that we can unlearn many patterns that are not helpful, and we can relearn or learn new patterns or new habits that are helpful. And it takes practice. So it's not going to necessarily feel comfortable to ask for help in the beginning, but the more that we do it, the easier it's going to become.
Yeah. And, I think something else that's really important to talk about too is the idea of mental health within the immigrant community, at least from my own experience, isn't really something that people talk about. Like the minute you mention mental health, it automatically like triggers this thing of like, well, I don't need mental health. Like I'm okay. Like if I have to go to a therapist, then something's wrong with me. And I disagree with that notion, and I know that it's something that at least like the newer generations are a little bit more open about having this conversation and seeking therapy, and like understanding that going to therapy doesn't mean that something's wrong with you. That it just means that you have a lot to unload and unpack, and things that you need to comb through. So what would you say about this, and like what's your experience with working with the immigrant community when it comes to this?
Right. I love this idea of the younger generation coming to therapy, because we actually see it. We're seeing a lot of young adults coming without problems, saying, I want to just focus on my self-care. I want to focus on what wellness means to me. I want to learn prevention before something goes wrong. And there is a lot of stigma. I think as a community, we need to be able to shift the way that we talk about mental health. Mental health, I love to say this message is not for crazy. That's a message that we hear.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you hear in the immigrant community or Latinx communities, other communities is, oh, eso es para locos. That is for crazy. It's actually the total opposite. It takes a lot of courage to be able to come to a space like this. It takes a lot of strength to be able to say, there's something that needs work. There's something that I can do to be the best self that I can be. There's something that I can gain from being able to open up my heart to someone else who can help me process what I'm experiencing. So let's start shifting and reframing what mental health is. And a lot of times when we think about mental health, we think about mental health in terms of like severe diagnosis, schizophrenia and bipolar and all of that. But mental health is a spectrum. We can be impacted by stress because of traffic in California. I'm from the East Coast. I went to Cali once. I was in traffic for 2 hours. I was super stressed out. So mental health doesn't just mean the severe. When things get really bad or when we have really big diagnoses, it means that it's an everyday endeavor to be able to care for our mind, to be able to care for our body, and to be able to care for our spirit.
Yeah. So, you mentioned about how not only like, what I was talking about earlier about how it's easier for the newer generations to go out there and ask for preventative measures, or like how they can be better at self-care. Can you outline some ways that people can take over their like feeling more empowered in their mental health, and like being more proactive about self-care?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to share a story about being a therapist that I always share, because I feel like we can all be the best tools that we can be for the people around us. Being a therapist for me means that I have to do the best that I can to take care of myself, so I can provide the best self to my clients. So I'm in a constant endeavor to be able to practice self-care, be well, manage my emotions, see my own therapist, and all of that. So our self-care is for us. Our wellness is for us, but it really impacts the people around us. So in our community, we think about our community as a whole. We think about our families. And sometimes we think about self-care in a way of like, it feels selfish to bring attention to us. But bringing attention to us means that we can be the best self that we can be, so we can serve others, so we can help others, so we can be the best way that we can. So with self-care, I invite people to come back to the basics. We're going to do the basic stuff that we should have been doing all along anyways. We're going to sleep well, like we should. We're going to bring nutritious things to our body. We're going to exercise and do movement. And exercise, you don't have to be an athlete. You can just go on a walk. I go on my hourly walk a day, and my pace is super slow, but it doesn't matter. That's my vitamin for my body. So whatever exercise looks like to you, that's what you can do. We're going to do things that bring us joy and repeat. It sounds really simple, right? We're going to do things that bring us joy and repeat. Kids are less stressed than adults because they play. They orient themselves to play, they paint, they color. And we as adults need to do that as well, as young adults, as adults. We're going to do the things that bring us joy, and we're going to repeat and repeat and repeat. We're going to set boundaries. We're going to learn when to say no or when to negotiate when there's so much in our plates that we're not able to manage. And that's another big thing in our community. It's hard to say no. But there's ways to say no without having to say no. I would love to be able to help at this moment, but I'm not able to. Can I connect you with someone else who can help you? It takes a lot of practice too. This took me an entire lifetime to be able to do that, because I didn't know about boundaries until I think my late 20s, when I experienced burned out. Make self-care a part of your survival. We have to eat, we have to breathe to survive. Make self-care a thing that you must do. Like, there's no negotiation out of that. You must self-care. Connect with others. I know right now we have difficulties connecting in person, and we have to practice physical social distancing. But that doesn't mean that we're not able to connect by phone, by video, and have those relationships and continue to nurture the relationships that we have. And when we think about self-care, we're also going to think we're going to think about these components that we're going to nurture. We're going to think about the mind. How do I nurture my mind? We're going to think about the body. We're going to think about the heart and the spirit. And by spirit, I don't necessarily mean religion. Spirit can mean my connection to the universe, my connection to earth, my connection to nature. And we're going to constantly assess how we're nurturing those parts of ourselves that makes our holistic well-being.
Thank you, Cheryl. I really like, and I identified with them a lot, because I know I'm personally working on self-care, because I haven't been extremely great at it. I'm still working on it. Boundaries is like the number one thing that I'm still trying to get like a good hold on. But definitely the self-care, finding moments of fun, whether that's, learning how to paint or draw or getting coloring book, like little things that maybe you really enjoyed in the past. Like, I know I used to love, I love reading. Let me change that. I love reading, but like sometimes you get so busy that like you don't like set time aside to do that. So like now in the mornings I read like for 30 minutes, even if I can't finish the book, but like it helps with self-care. I feel like it sets the tone for the rest of the day. And like you mentioned earlier through the session, was that you can't fill somebody else's cup if yours is completely empty, right? Like that's how you burn out, right? But thank you so much for mentioning some of those self-care tips. I know we have a question in the chat box about how do you get people that, whether it's a family member or somebody you love, that you see that maybe they're struggling with self-care, or setting boundaries, or setting that time aside. Like, how do you encourage them to seek help or to pay attention to the fact that they might need some self-care?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, one of the things that I have found most helpful, and I have found people find most helpful, is being able to model what that looks like for other people, and being able to share your experience. Like, if you have a positive experience doing X, Y, and Z, going to the gym or going out for a walk or talking to a counselor, being able to share that experience in a way to connect with other people. We connect through our stories and our shared experiences. So we all can also kind of notice when somebody may be struggling, and we can mindfully bring that to their attention. I noticed that you have been really exhausted in the last few weeks. I wonder if you may need some ideas about how to deal with that. And I like the idea of asking permission. of asking us to, we're about to enter somebody else's world. We really don't know if they have really thought about all these things before. So we want to be able to be helpful, but also ask permission about, hey, like I've noticed this. I wonder if I can be helpful, or I wonder if I can provide some ideas. And try the modeling piece, like invite someone to come on a walk with you, invite someone to talk to you, invite someone to paint virtually. I like to paint. I'm not a great painter, but now I have to, do it from my home. But you can invite a friend to do something virtually. So being able to connect with someone through your own story and your own kind of demonstrating what that looks like.
Yeah, I will definitely take up the suggestion of doing more virtual activities, especially in the times that we're in. I know that sometimes it's hard to reach out to friends when you can't really see them. Maybe there's like a distance, whether it's physical or whatever. But I definitely like the idea of setting some time aside, and whether you can't show up in a physical aspect, maybe you can do it virtually. Moving on to like another question, there's one from a viewer who's saying, like, as a child of immigrants, what introductory resources can we provide on mental health to our families that'll ease them out of the stigmatization of seeking help on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually is something that I wanted to add to the last question, and I think I can compile in the same question. Sharing resources, sharing articles that you have found helpful, sharing. Right now there's a big movement among mental health professionals to be who are working really hard to end the stigma of mental health, and we're helping individuals and media and all kinds of entities to be able to reframe the way that we talk about mental health. And I know Informed Immigrant has lots of resources within the website around mental health and what mental health means. So I would begin with when we hear conversations about mental health in our family, and if we're not having them, I encourage you to have them. But being able to kind of call out like a myth or a misconception about mental health, being able to say to someone, hey, that has not been my experience. That is not what I have learned. That is not what I have heard from other people. This is what I have heard from other people in terms of mental health. I like to think when I propose mental health to our community, I like to invite people to think about a space for them. We care so much for other people, and sometimes we have things that we want to deal with for ourselves, and we may need a neutral person to be able to help us. And what I normally tell people, and hopefully this message resonates for some, is that when there's like a physical problem that we have, we go to our primary care doctor, we go to our doctors, and who takes care of our heart and our mind. So counseling and therapy can provide that space for someone to be able to deal with what they're going in internally.
Thank you for sharing those, Cheryl. I do think it's extremely important that we have these conversations with our families, because I know that, I've had some of these conversations also with my parents or grandparents or CEOs, the whole notion, right? Because we've talked about this earlier, but like the stigmatization in our communities is that people who go to a therapist, there's like something wrong with them. So you have to tell them, like, that's not what it is. You can seek help about something really simple that maybe it's been bothering you or whatever. So thank you for sharing those. I know we're reaching the end of the English session, and we'll be switching over to Spanish. But before we close out, we did have another question about other videos similar to this, and where they might exist. I know that on Informed Immigrant, we have a few resources that people can go to, informedimmigrant.com. You'll find some for mental health. But Cheryl, you host some of these conversations on a regular basis. Do you want to tell the viewers about those?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to close with this, because I know that it's important to help other people, but our healing is equally as important. So sometimes we want to help others and guide them into their own healing journey. And it's important to come back to us. And I really like this quote that I heard by a colleague of mine: when we heal, when we focus on our healing, by default, we're helping others heal, those that are around us, and we're even helping our ancestors heal. So sometimes we may get frustrated when others may not get the help that they may need, but we need to bring the focus back on us. And by default, others around us can be lighter, better, because of the work that we're doing. I have a Facebook Live in Spanish every Thursday at 7 p.m. at Facebook facebook.com/Hope Center for Wellness. And I'm also there through that forum. I share other videos like this or other opportunities to connect. I know that there's many other specialists or mental health therapists who are focusing on immigrant mental health. So I can share with you at the end some links of where you can go to find those resources.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. I will say I love the quote that you gave so much, because I know that that's something that I've been told or I come across a lot, is that, what we're doing is healing all of the generational trauma that has been passed on to us. And that's how we stop it and make sure that we don't pass it on to our kids or our younger family members, and that we're able to be better when it comes to mental health and having these conversations. So I really love that. And I think that's a great way to close on our English segment of our conversation and switch over to Spanish now for the actual full thing. But thank you, Cheryl. Thank you to everyone who has been watching us up until now.